everyone, and welcome to our video on social child development. In this video, I'm going to go into greater detail about two main components of social development in early childhood. As I mentioned in the preview for this topic is huge, and so it was so hard for me to decide what to cover in a short video. And so I chose these two topics because they are pretty big topics, both in terms of the robust research evidence behind them to suggest their importance in development, as well as they are big topics because many students find them very relevant to their life and interested in them. So I hope that you find these topics interesting and important for you as well. I'm going to go into them in deeper detail in this video, and then the assignment for this topic is also on these two main concepts. So as we move forward into this particular topic on social child development, we didn't have time in this video, and your text really doesn't go into detail about prenatal development, but let me just say that prenatal development is amazing. If you were to ask me what's the most important developments that occur over the lifespan, I would say it's during the prenatal period, right? All the foundations of life are laid there. So much of who we are today was built during that stage. And more than just our DNA, we actually learn things about the environment in utero. We learn about the world that we're going to come into, and we become, as best as we can, prepared to enter that world. Whether we're going to come into a world of famine, or a bounty of food, what kind of language we're going to hear when we enter the world, what kinds of tastes are around in the food that we will be given. Our body begins to adapt, and our brain begins to adapt even in utero. So just for fun, if you're interested, in the link below or in the comment link area below, I'm going to put a link to a TED Talk by a science writer on what you learn before you're born. So if you're interested in the prenatal period, please be sure to check that video out for fun. But when we are born, we come into the world seemingly very incompetent. Think about like a giraffe that comes into the world, is birthed, falls feet from kind of uterus to the ground, and gets up and goes for a run, right? We do not have that kind of privilege. We come into the world seemingly very incompetent, needing a lot of care and attention, coming into the world very vulnerable. We actually call this time period early in infancy the fourth trimester, that really we should have another trimester in utero to allow us to become more developed, but the human body just can't contain a child for that long. And so we do a lot of our developing even after birth. And so we are, though, very competent in a few very interesting ways. Just like life in utero prepares us for the outside world, we come equipped for some things in our world that are very important they're just very important. So just so you know, those two pictures on the bottom are my daughter McKenna. Don't let that one where she's all sweet with my dog Bella fool you. That one on the right is what she looked like most of the time. Those were challenging days. Okay. So we have all kinds of physical as well as cognitive competencies, things like reflexes that allow an infant to find the nipple of a bottle or breast to eat and survive. But just like that, we come equipped with some very unique social competencies. Most of them are very unique to humans because we are social creatures and we live in a social world. And so it's important to have these kinds of social competencies. Some people don't come equipped with these. For instance, children with autism often don't come with these as kind of reflexes. They have to be taught these things in order to engage in their social world, like people who aren't on the spectrum. But for those who aren't on the spectrum, typically these competencies are inborn. And the first one is imitation. So if you look on your screen, there's a picture of a man with big hair. That's Andrew Meltzoff from the University of Washington. I took classes from him. He's making faces at these newborn infants, and the infants are imitating his faces. Now that might not seem all that interesting, But it is, because if you think about it, these are brand new infants. They were just born hours ago, and they don't even know they have a face. They've never seen a face before. And if you look to the figure up above with a series of faces that are blurred out, and you see at 3 days what infants can see, they can hardly even see his face. And yet, within moments, they are making the same kinds of facial features in response to those that they're seeing. This, we believe, is a biological process. It is like a reflex that they are imitating what they see. Why might this be important for social development? Because so much of what we do as social creatures is we imitate. It's the basis of empathy, right? That if you are communicating something sad to me and I have a really happy look on my face, there's a disconnect and it could be hard to bond. The first moment your infant smiles at you, it's like the heavens open up and the angels sing, even though it's usually just a neurological response and not an emotional one. It doesn't matter. To be able to engage socially and emotionally with one another can be a critical bonding experience that can be important for survival. Preference for faces. Infants come born into this world for preference for faces, and not just like you see those happy face figures, not just that they like circles and certain shapes, but that they like the face to be upright. They like the face to be looking at them, and they will look at those kinds of faces for longer than any other shape or any other kind of face that might be looking away from them. The idea that ingrained in them, there's some kind of understanding that you need to look longer at faces because important information is communicated from faces, particularly when they are looking at you. So if you look at this other figure that says 1 month old and 3 month olds, those are actually the red lines are where infants are looking. And at first they just look at the eyes and the mouth because there's some understanding that these are the pieces of the face that communicate important information. And so I will automatically be scanning those areas. And as they get older, again, they start to scan a little bit more broadly, but still you can see even more so focusing on the eyes and the mouth, which makes it a strange time now more than ever if you think about coronavirus and wearing masks, that we're covering up a really important part of the way in which we communicate information. Certainly verbally, but even just emotionally and expressively, a lot comes from the mouth in terms of our understanding of each other. Finally, all kinds of sensory senses are very underdeveloped in infants, particularly their vision, as you can see here in that figure in terms of how sharp their vision comes over the first year of life. Infants cannot see very well at all, but the thing that they can see the most clearly is the thing that is 12 inches from their face. And isn't it amazing that what is that thing that's usually 12 inches from their face? Think about holding a baby, right? It's a caregiver, it's a loved one, it's someone that they are to receive social and emotional information from, and that's the thing that they can see most clearly. So just some really cool, I think, competencies that children are born with, even though they look kind of fairly incapable. These kinds of inborn social competencies set us up to learn about our social and emotional environment. So it's also believed that humans and other animals come hardwired with this drive to attach to others. And by attach here, I mean create this emotional attachment. This work began with Conrad Lorenz. You see him there with his ducklings or geese. There is a biological hardwired drive that happens when chicks are born, that the moment they hatch, the first moving thing they see, they imprint or attach to. It's this biological process where they will then follow that being everywhere it goes with the understanding, not conceptual understanding, but biological understanding that I have to follow this thing because it's going to ensure my survival. I will imitate it, I will follow it, and I will learn then what it is to be a goose in order to survive. It's believed that we have a similar, although not as fixed, biological process where we are inborn with the need, with the drive, with the biological preparedness to attach emotionally to a primary caregiver. This was tested first in monkeys, Harry Harlow was a researcher studying love, and he wanted to see, is love just a provision of food? Do infants love their caregiver because the caregiver provides food? Or is there something more about comfort and security and safety that is about love? So what he did was he took infant monkeys away from their mothers, and he gave them two surrogate mothers here. One that was hard mesh material, but that had food, and one that was covered in this warm, nice terry cloth. He discovered that infant monkeys certainly had to go eat occasionally, but that they spent most of their time on these comforting mothers. And it wasn't so much that it was just more comfortable for their bodies, but that this kind of surrogate mother provided them a sense of security and safety so that they would explore their environment more readily if she was there. They would actually turn and kind of ward off enemies if she was there, and that they would run to her if threatened. So the idea is that even in monkeys, we see this kind of attachment, this kind of love, this kind of need for some kind of attachment figure or caregiver. Around the same time Harry Harlow was doing his work with monkeys, Mary Ainsworth was doing work with humans and wondering, okay, if we have this kind of attachment, what does it look like? Can I measure it? And are there different types of attachment? And so she developed something called the strange situation. Harry Harlow did the exact same thing with his monkeys. He developed this strange situation and measured attachment with them. Mary Ainsworth did it with young children. This is a very complicated chart here. I don't need you to know all of it. I want you to know the gist, which is what she did was she brought children into an unfamiliar room, a strange situation. It was a laboratory, there were toys around, and they came in with their primary caregiver. At the time, in the 50s and 60s, it was primarily mothers, so you'll hear that language a lot. An attachment figure does not need to be a mother. It doesn't need to be a biological relative. It just needs to be a primary caregiver, someone who's kind of their primary go-to for care. So this caregiver and the child would come into this room. They would watch to see, where does the child go for play? Is the child clinging to the caregiver? Does the child explore openly and not really even care that the caregiver's there? Or does the child kind of use this parent or this attachment figure as a base for security? Kind of like the game, if you ever played like home base, and you'd go and you'd run off and you'd try and get caught, and then you'd come back and you'd be like, I'm home base, like it's safe. Are they using their attachment figure like that? Do they provide some sense of security? Then you can see here there's all kinds of separations. The child ends up alone at one point. Then a stranger comes back, and then finally the parent comes back at the end. And the big question here is, when this caregiver, when this attachment figure returns, what's the child's reaction? Most of them are pretty distraught about being alone. So when that caregiver comes back, are they just thankful that someone's in the room? The stranger's just fine. As long as someone's in the room and they're not alone, they're okay. Or are they pretty angry that that caregiver left, and they're anxious about them maybe leaving again, so they don't calm very easily, right? They might cry, they might start to soothe, and then the moment the caregiver tries to put them down again, they cry out, right? They're just anxious. Or are they upset, but then when the caregiver returns, they seek contact with that individual and they're quickly calmed? Like, just the presence alone of their caregiver kind of changes their affect and disposition in a way where it's as if they're saying, oh, okay, we're good, right? So in the comment section below, I'm going to put two links. I can't actually have you view them in this video form. I can't play it at the same time. So what you will see here are two separate videos. One is a demonstration of the strange situation, so you can actually see what this looks like and see the ways in which kids can respond differently. And then this video over here, you will see it's how this kind of connection, this safety that is developed between a child and a caregiver is all about this emotional synchrony. Kind of there's this dance. And sometimes I might step on your toes and you might step on mine, but if generally speaking we're in sync, then that provides a stable foundation, kind of a safety net that I can go out and explore. You can mess up, I can mess up, but we can come back and we can get back together, and that is going to provide a foundation from which I can develop from that. And I'll get into that more in a moment. From Mary Ainsworth's work in the strain situation, she was able to design or find 4 different types of attachment classifications or attachment styles. Your text will talk very briefly just about secure attachment and insecure attachment. So there is secure attachment, and then you see 3 others. All of those 3 others are under the umbrella of insecure attachment, okay? Here you can see, as I mentioned, the securely attached infant may be very upset when the caregiver leaves, but they adjust and they kind of calm very quickly. For the insecure categories, the resistant attachment pattern is where they resist that reunion. On one hand, they want it. On the other hand, they're angry. On one hand, they want it. On the other hand, they're anxious about the caregiver leaving again. It's as if they can't trust them. They don't know what to expect. There might be some inconsistencies. The avoidant attachment style is, just as the name would suggest, the child is somewhat avoidant. It's as if I can't really trust you, rely on you, depend on you, so I've just learned to kind of figure it out on my own. And it's nice when you're around, you're in the room, that I don't like to be alone, but I'm gonna go my own way and figure it out on my own. The disorganized attachment is a category that was added later, and this usually represents kind of the greatest maladjustment, because it's so disorganized. Oftentimes infants that have this type of style, not always, but sometimes come from homes where there is abuse or severe neglect. It's just that the environment is so kind of traumatic and inconsistent that their behavior is also inconsistent and all over the place. Now, Harry Harlow, his work with attachment is very inhumane. It's very infamous, and I think it's really important to say that, because as a field we have a history of sometimes doing very inhumane and unethical work, as I mentioned several weeks ago, and we don't highlight it or talk about it. And I think it's very important that we highlight and talk about the ways in which we have gone wrong, so that we can continue to correct ourselves. So his work was with animals, and at the time there was very few guidelines for humane animal care. And so what he did was he said, well, if this attachment relationship seems to be so important for the development of these monkeys, what happens if we take that opportunity and that attachment away? So what he did with some of his infant monkeys was he would separate them from their mothers, and he would not replace them with a surrogate. He would just provide them with food. And what he saw was very maladaptive behavior that came about. There were very poor developmental outcomes for these monkeys. They would engage in self-injurious behavior. They would try to self-soothe by, as you see, just kind of going in the fetal position, rocking in corners. They wouldn't know how to socialize with other monkeys. They would, at times, they weren't often interested in reproduction, but if they did reproduce, they would fail to parent their offspring and sometimes engage in murderous behavior toward their offspring. Now, I say this with caution, that in any situation, we can't draw complete connections between animal behavior and human behavior, right? But we do tragically have some cases in which young children have the inability to attach to a primary caregiver, particularly when you look in certain countries and overrun and overcrowded orphanages or institutions where young children are kept, where just by the very nature of them, it's impossible for there to be a consistent primary caregiver. What we see is that the longer these children are kept in those kinds of situations, the more difficult it is for them to attach to a caregiver ever. And in fact, there is a psychological disorder called reactive attachment disorder, which is describes just this. The behavior is not as severe as you would see in these monkeys, but it can be very severe, where these children have the inability to understand kind of this emotional bond or connection. They have the ability to then receive it or to demonstrate it. There are some forms of treatment for this, but it can be very kind of ineffective and very challenging, not to say that it's without hope. But I think it's something that's very important to state here and to mention. So all of this is happening in childhood. So what does this mean for adulthood? And why are we talking so much about it? This importance of attachment can many times be overstated. But it is a really big foundation for development as a whole, because attachment is believed to form the foundation of later relationships. That this kind of relationship that happens with the primary caregiver becomes the foundation, becomes a template at which is applied to every subsequent relationship after that. To maybe a second or third primary caregiver, to siblings, to other relatives, to friends, to romantic partners, and then perhaps to a child of their own one day. And that there can be change to that attachment categorization over time, but that in most cases there is not change. In around 70% of cases, when you measure someone's infant attachment and then you measure their attachment in adulthood, around 70% of the time, it's the same. So there is a lot of therapeutic intervention around attachment in early childhood and also attachment in adulthood. So many therapists have kind of this attachment style approach that they may be working with individuals or with families. The attachment styles in adulthood are very much the same. They just have different names. But you can imagine, let's say, someone who's fairly avoidant being in a romantic relationship with someone who's very anxious, and there being a lot of disconnect in the ways in which they expect love and demonstrate love. So there's a lot of therapeutic interventions around this. And so our assignment for this week, one of them, part one, is to take a survey that actually measures your adult attachment style. Now, let me say, very importantly, there is a way to diagnose this in a very scientifically, kind of very valid way. This assessment that I'm giving you is not that. This is just for fun, just for an opportunity for you to kind of reflect on your own behavioral patterns and relationship patterns. In no way, shape, or form diagnose yourself or others by this questionnaire. But what you're going to do is respond to many different questions, and then it will give you a result about where you exist in this quadrant here. Are you on kind of the high or low avoidance realm, and then where are you in terms of low and high anxiety? And you will actually see a dot in terms of where you are on this quadrant, and then what's kind of how most people who have completed this survey, what the average is for their response, so that you can compare yourself. And then I'm going to ask you to reflect on that and to provide some evidence for why you think that might be accurate or not, and why it's important or not. Okay. Now, attachment classification is related to all kinds of factors. Environmental factors, individual factors. You can imagine some people, some temperament styles, personality styles are just kind of easier to love than others. They actually call these children difficult. That's their temperament or personality style, right? And it's just harder, meaning, to find that kind of emotional synchrony with. There might also be things like mental illness, where it can increase in predictability, right, because of the symptoms. There could be great changes in environment that could, again, impact the predictability of a primary attachment figure. Now, attachment is fairly, it's not very fragile, meaning, again, if there's unemployment or a certain type of employment and it takes a parent away for a while, it doesn't necessarily mean that the child's going to have an insecure attachment. So for instance, mothers that work full-time do not necessarily have a child with insecure attachment. That research has been done. A lot of work's been done on that. Both parents, if there's two parents or one parent, multiple parents, they can all work and have a child with secure attachment, right? But there are things like poverty, mental illness, that can influence attachment. Not by destiny, right? Not for certain, but they can. One of the things that can also influence attachment classification or styles is the type of parenting. And so what we're going to talk about next are some very researched parenting styles. There's all different kinds of ways to measure parenting. This is one of the most common in our field. And this too is a quadrant, that there are 4 different styles of parenting. I have the labels up here, and I have some kind of general sayings or approaches for every parent, or for those styles. This is organized according to these 2 lines. One line being responsiveness and warmth, high or low, meaning how responsive is a caregiver to the child. Are they responsive in terms of, I see you, I hear you, I know what you need, I'm going to respond as if you are an agent in this, rather than I'm just going to respond and you're going to do what I say, right? So high responsiveness would be, I'm responding to you. Low responsiveness would be, I might see you there, but I'm not responding to you as an individual and thinking about you and changing or adapting to you. The other category is demandingness or control. High demandingness being lots of responsibilities, lots of expectations. You typically as a child would know each and every single one of these, where low control or demandingness would be little responsibilities, little structure, little expectation. We could say low strictness to high strictness. You might, without even taking a questionnaire, know exactly where your caregiver was or where you might land as a caregiver yourself. But the second part of our assignment for this week is for you to take a questionnaire that asks questions about parenting style and for you to kind of categorize yourself or a caregiver. I have a lot of caveats on the assignment in terms of how you can address this, whether it be as a way you were parented, as a way you parent or would like to parent. That's up to you. I know there's all different kinds of family circumstances among our students, so pick what works best for you, what you think would be most interesting and applicable. And you will find yourself somewhere on this quadrant and then respond in terms of its meaning. So if you need to come back to this, this video and kind of look at this slide and see where you're at. Another fun thing I like to do is to pick different TV families and kind of plot them here. That's a great way to do that, or to imagine if a child comes home a few minutes after curfew, what would happen, right? The permissive parent would likely say, no big deal, right? I had the light on for you, so just, maybe let me know when you're home. The authoritative parent would say, this rule is here for a reason. Why were you late? We should establish a consequence, but, maybe next time let me know ahead of time that you're going to be late, so at least I know. The authoritarian parent, this is high demandingness, low warmth, they would say, they would lock the door and you're not getting in. Or you get home late and you're going to have a week without, your phone or seeing friends. And then the uninvolved parent, again, there's all kinds of range within this quadrant, within this spectrum, but it might be like, we don't have curfews, come home when you're done having fun. Or, I don't really even know where you're at tonight. So a whole range of responses, a whole range of parenting styles. We tend to find, just like secure attachment tends to be the best form of attachment in terms of positive developmental outcomes, in terms of internal locus of control, things like self-control, good relationships, better employment and grades in school. The same also tends to be true for authoritative type parenting. These tend to be associated with the most positive developmental outcomes. That doesn't mean that if you yourself are an uninvolved parent or had uninvolved parents that there's nothing like, there's resiliency, right? People can have positive outcomes even in the most dire of circumstances, which is the beauty of human nature. and our competencies, right? But just generally speaking, on average, that's where we tend to see the most positive outcomes. The final thing I'll say here, because this is an important one, we are cultural beings as well. So culture matters. In some places, in some cultures, we don't have time to negotiate. I don't have time to figure out why you were late and how we might adjust that for the next time, right? That we don't have time because we are not in a safe place. And you need to follow what I say and follow it now, because if you don't, your life could be in danger, right? And so there, in those kinds of circumstances, authoritative might not be the best parenting strategy. You might see the most positive outcomes for authoritarian parenting. So just keep that in mind, that when all that we're talking about is always kind of on average, and we're talking about that bell-shaped curve, and there's always examples on the extreme that we need to think about, talk about, investigate, and not just diminish and say everything has to be this way, all right? It depends. It always depends. So I hope you have a great week learning through or reading through the lifespan and development, engaging in the assignment for this week. Please let me know if you have questions. This week in live office hours, we'll be talking about the course in general, any questions you have, as well as diving deeper into some concepts of development, perhaps my own research. So hope to see you there for those of you that can make it. Otherwise, have a great week, be in touch, and happy learning.